Our chapter is diseases and immunity, and our learning outcomes are going to be um, we're going to have what a disease is, the defenses, how does the body defend its body against diseases, and then we're going to see what we call pathogens and what we call pathogens plus the rest of the stuff. So I'm very sure most of you have heard this from your teachers or from your previous classes. What, how you could describe the topic of the section of disease? What is a disease? How do we diagnose diseases? How do you what recommendations do we do? And then the pathologies, what is their role, treatment, and then that area. So, in simple terms, our question would be now, what is a disease? So we've all had what we called coronavirus, and it's been a very big pandemic that is affecting everyone, has put us behind the masks, and we are wondering why would we be behind the masks for all this time when we are not anywhere. Like, this is not the usual thing that was happening. So we are wondering why this would happen this time. So we go to what we call a disease. Just a minute. Okay, so our learning outcomes are going to be define what the term pathogens, and then what we call transmissible diseases, or describe how pathogens can be spread from person to person, outline the body's defenses against diseases. So all this is going to be something. So in regards to what we call a disease, is a particular abnormal condition that negatively affects the structure or functions of all parts or part of an organism. A disease is a particular abnormal condition that negatively affects the structure or function of all or part of an organism, and it is not due to any immediate external injury. So any disorder in the body that results into malfunctioning, to malfunction, that is the body functioning in the opposite way, is what we call a disease. So when you get a question regarding what a disease is, it's just any disorder in the body which results into the malfunctioning of that body. Either it can be a part of the body or the whole body, but in this sense, it does not come from the external. It's like not an external injury. So it just happens and happens inside your body. That's what we call a disease, and that's what we see. So diseases are often known to be medical conditions that are associated with specific signs and symptoms. So another definition would be, or an associate definition would be any a medical condition that is associated with specific signs and symptoms. So we have what we call as clinical symptoms. These are signs which are particular for a given infection, a given disease. Some of these diseases are caused by what we call small organisms known as pathogens. So pathogens are transmissible. Pathogens are disease-causing agents. The disease-causing agents or organisms. So most of the organisms that cause the disease in humans are bacteria. So pathogens can be in any of the five. It can be a bacteria pathogen, it can be a virus, it can be a protoxist, it can be a fungi, or it can be anything, but it is among those organisms which we call, they are always small, minute, and we may not see them by our eyes. So most of them are bacterial, they are viral pathogens, We have the fungi or fungal pathogens like a ringworm. We have yes, fungi. We have the protoctists like the Plasmodium germs and the rest of the disease. So all those are called pathogens. So they can spread from one host to another, and they are called transmissible diseases. Most of these diseases can be from one person to another, to another, to another. So, because we can pass them from one individual to the other, that's why we call it a transmissible disease or transmissible diseases. So these diseases are named as such because the pathogens are passed or transmitted from one person to another through contact or various ways. Some of these pathogens are passed on from one person to the other through contact, through fluids, through sharing materials. Yeah, yeah. We realize that most of these diseases we get them when we are not aware. Sometimes we get them through body fluids and wastes. So, because we can get them from one person to the other, now they are given another name which is called infectious diseases. Infectious diseases are diseases which can be passed on from one person to the other. Diseases which can be communicable, infectious, from one person to the other. And it can be through contact, it can be through air, it can be through fluids or materials or wastes. You've heard of some infections where they are said to be suffering from a certain disease, and if you touch either their saliva, you get it. You touch their sweat, you get it, or their physical material, you get it. So that makes it to be a transmissible or infectious diseases. So infectious diseases are that. So we have now the different types of diseases and their mode of transmission. For example, we have air. Transmission through air, we have pathogens which are very tiny, in tiny droplets of liquids from the airways and lungs of infected people. So examples of such pathogens that are passed on either from the sneeze. Let's say someone sneezes, are those particles which come and are passed on. They are passed on through air, so it's a communicable disease. And this fluid, if it comes from the lungs or the airways of the mucus from such people, so it is said to be passed on through air. Examples, we have influenza, we have tuberculosis, we have common cold. All these ones are examples of what we call the pathogens whose diseases can be contracted just through air. And these are, most of them are viral. For example, influenza, tuberculosis, common cold, all these are transmissible through droplets of the person. Then we have those which we get from contaminated foods and drinks. We know people preparing food do not wash their hands well. Foods are not good, are not cooked properly. Or human feces, contaminated water supplies, flies transfer pathogens on their bodies. So such diseases are bacterial. We have the cholera from the Vibrio cholerae, and then typhoid from typhus. So these ones are passed on from either unwashed hands, drinking unboiled water or untreated water, or touching fecal materials and then you contaminate the food, or from flies. So they are very serious diseases which we need to be very careful about. That is that is Unit 10, Chapter 10, Unit 10.1, diseases and the pathogens, diseases, transmission, and all that stuff. So the other one, which we can get from direct contact, for example, it can be hugging, it can be kissing, it can be sleeping on the same place, it can be putting on the same clothes. A lot and a lot of these diseases, maybe handshakes, we have many of them, but I'll give one example of arthritis food. This one, uninfected people touch infected people or items that are infected from the infected people or used by the infected people, and then we get them. We have those other diseases which are transmitted by vectors, which are like mosquitoes, insects, like mosquito bites, for example. You know, a mosquito bite? A mosquito comes and lands onto your skin when it is looking for juice, that is a meal from your body. And because it is looking for a meal from your body, but on its mouth, which is the proboscis, it is harboring a certain bacteria, it is harboring a certain protoctist known as a certain protoctist, which is so when it inoculates you, then the protoctist inside it, the plasmodium, will now, as it sucks blood, the plasmodium directly gets into your blood, and then you get the disease. So this one, insects like mosquitoes feed on blood of an infected person, and then it inoculates them with the plasmodium germ, which enters into the body and then lays the eggs on red blood cells and results into a serious sickness, which is called a serious sickness. And that way you get malaria. Another example, we have also what we call dengue fever and all that stuff. So we have body fluids again. Our body fluids, that is blood from an infected person enters the blood of an infected person, e.g., and sterilized needle shared between drug addicts. This one here, we have. It is believed that most of the transmission of HIV/AIDS virus came so much into the drug abusers, whereby they could share needles to inject themselves with drugs, and finally they share blood which is contaminated from an infected person to an infected person, and at the end of the day they get infected. So that is through contact, that is through body fluids. HIV/AIDS is one of them, and also hepatitis, which is a liver disease. It's among those that we get either by sharing fluids, body fluids, and all that stuff, including kissing, for your information. Now we have the sexual activities. We have those diseases still we get via sexual activities. For example, the pathogens pass from infected person to sexual partner in blood, semens, or vaginal fluids, and this is a very good example. So vaginal fluids and semens, these are fluids that come from our private parts, for example, the vagina and maybe the penis. So when you are infected, these fluids come alongside with these diseases. And in many cases, if another person happens to have a wound or shares what you have shared on that contains your fluids, it is very easy for them to gain these infections. HIV/AIDS, non-specific urethritis, and then chlamydia. Chlamydia is basically in girls, and it is easily transmitted. So, having seen the diseases and mode of transmission and what causes them, which we refer to as the pathogens, so that now takes us to another part. When we come to defense, we have three lines of defense, three different lines of defense. three different lines of defense. We have the first line of defense, which is non-specific. The first line of defense is not secretive, it is non-specific. It prevents entry of these pathogens inside our body. And then the other two are cell-mediated defenses. Cell-mediated defenses, and those cell-mediated defenses are what we call, some of them are specific, others are non-specific. So let us look at the first line of defense. Everyone is aware of what we call the first line of defense. So the first line of defense refers to all the natural barriers and the oils which the body produces to prevent and also send away or cleans up what we call the pathogens. For example, the first line of defense prevents pathogens from entering the body. And the second line of defense destroys any pathogens that break through the first line of defense and enters the body. The third line of defense produces antibodies that defend us against specific pathogens. Let us look at the first line of defense, which we call the natural barriers. So the barriers to infection. The defenses we have against entry of pathogens are mechanical and the chemical barriers. So the first line of defense is both mechanical and the chemical barrier. Examples of the mechanical barriers. Mechanical barriers, these are structures that make it difficult for pathogens to get past them into the body. For example, we have a skin. A skin is the dead outer layer of the skin. Okay, the dead outer layer of the skin forms a barrier to entry. That's why if you touch your skin on the outside, it feels like it has like a dead ends. And that dead end prevents the entry of any bacteria via the skin. And if it cuts, it begins to heal itself by forming a scab, which you call a scar. So this is why we say that the skin is the biggest mechanical barrier, because it prevents entry of pathogens, and in the case of any injury, it will result into, in case of any injury, it will try to form back so that there is nothing that enters via it. Number two, we have hairs in the nose and all over the body. The hairs you see on the skin play a very big role. For example, in the ears and in the nose, the hairs trap the debris, that is, trapping the dust that would enter. Number two, also trap the bacteria or any other viral infection which would enter via the air. Because the air we breathe in is contaminated, so we have to prevent it from entering into our body by the hair, which act as the screens. So the hairs in the nose trap large particles that you breathe in. This makes it difficult for pathogens to get past them further up the nose, so they are not inhaled into the lungs. They are not inhaled into the lungs. Then the chemical barriers. These are the chemicals which the body produces to prevent entry of pathogens. For example, we have in the stomach, we secrete what we call hydrochloric acid, which is described in the previous topic about digestion, that kills pathogens in the ingested food. So chemical barriers include the hydrochloric acid, which kills the pathogens in the ingested food. So when you eat your food, it goes into the stomach, then the stomach produces the gastric juice that contains hydrochloric acid, and this hydrochloric acid now filters out all the bacteria and then kills them. We have the mucus. Most of you see mucus and you see it as something disgusting, but without mucus, would be having a lot of problems. So mucus produced by the cells lining the airway, that is the bronchi and the trachea, traps small dust particles and microorganisms. So the mucus traps small dust particles and microorganisms which would have escaped and entered into the air sacs. The cilia beat to carry a stream of mucus up to your nose and throat, removing the particles and pathogens which you then swallow. We have a problem. Some of you have a challenge of not wanting to sneeze. But sneezing is a reflex action whereby deep inside your bronchus or bronchus, the cilia, which are the small hair which are there, have trapped a lot of the bacteria and other debris. So because they have already found their way in, so mucus tries to beat it up. It beats it up and then sends it back via the nose and the throat for you to swallow so that they don't go into the lungs and destroy them. So the sneezing is the body's defensive mechanism against any debris that is falling into your lungs. And this is why it's okay for you to sneeze. And I don't see a reason why people have to say, "Excuse me." No, you don't need to be excused. So the chemical barriers and the physical barriers, as discussed above, they make the first line of defense. That means they prevent any entry of any microorganism via them. And in the case it happens and they happen to go through them, then the second line of defense comes into play. In case any pathogen gets through these barriers, so this is the first line of defense. In case any pathogen goes through them and maybe enters, then another defense, the body is strategically placed. Another defense comes in now, and that defense is going to be uh, that defense is going to be the second line of defense. So let's look at the second line of defense. Second line of defense, we're gonna see. Now, the second line of defense, as you can see on the sides here, is about the big. It's cell mediated, and it contains the big phagocytic cells. And these cells are called the phagocytes. Phagocytes, they are white blood cells. They are bigger and they are responsible for engulfing, that is, finding out what has escaped via the first line of defense, go for it, and then they kill it. So they are also non-specific in reaction. They are non-specific, meaning they don't have specific pathogens they attack. Any pathogen that goes their way, they will go for it and then attack it. For example, white blood cells make up this next line of defense against any pathogens that enter the body's tissue of the blood by the process of phagocytosis. Phagocytes, which make up about 70% of white blood cells, engulf, absorb the viruses into vacuoles where they are then digested using enzymes which kills them, okay? So when pathogens invade the body, phagocytes move towards them. They can squeeze through the capillaries. So when the pathogens invade the body, the phagocytes move towards them, they squeeze through the capillaries, and it attacks them, kills them. And that's how the second line of defense. So lymphocytes. Now, we have two other types of cells, but together here, I'll discuss them. So the white blood cells, which we call phagocytes, for them they are non-specific defenses, which result into defending the body by engulfing those microorganisms, put them into the body's vacuum, and then digest them dead. Now, the third line of defense is made up of the lymphocytes. Lymphocytes, these are other white blood cells, but for them, they are found in the lymphatic system. These lymphocytes are divided into two, as if you saw my video on my YouTube channel that I shared about the specific defense. So for the lymphocytes, which mark the third line of defense, they are specific in action. Their specificity comes about with the structure which is complementary to the pathogen they attack. So we have two types of lymphocytes. We have when they are produced in the lymph nodes of the lymphatic system. Then they differentiate into two. One group of the lymphocytes grow into the bone marrows. And when it grows into the bone marrows, it turns into structures which we call the B lymphocytes, because they grow from bone marrows, so they become B lymphocytes. These B lymphocytes here, they are the ones which differentiate into plasma cells. Plasma cells are what we call antibodies. Then the other group of lymphocytes, once they are produced, they grow near the chest, where we have a gland called the thymus gland. Thymus gland, because it's thymus, it has a T part, a T. So the cells which grow from the thymus gland are known as the T lymphocytes. So both the B lymphocytes, which are the white blood cells, as well as which are the antibodies, as well as the memory cells, work together with the T lymphocytes. T lymphocytes can identify the pathogen and present them to the antibodies, which are specific to destroy that particular pathogen. So that makes the two differences. You can research more about it for more information. So the lymphocytes, which are white blood cells that produce antibodies, are activated during an infection by the pathogens. Once a variety of effects, they do a variety of effects, including attacking and stopping pathogens, moving through the body and making it easy for phagocytes to engulf and destroy them. So a vaccination is a way to make lymphocytes produce antibodies, which prevents long-term protection or provides long-term protection against certain diseases. So when you go for a vaccine, they either inject you with either the real parasite or a dead parasite to stimulate your body to be able to produce antibodies which are specific to that parasite, and they can fight it. Such kind of immunity helps you to keep immune for a long period of time. By the time you get the infection, your body is able to identify it and treat it before you get any further infections. So, for key points of Unit 1.1, the following things we have studied. A pathogen is a disease-causing organism. That's number one, a take-home. Pathogens can be transmitted from one host to another through air droplets, by direct contact, in food and water, and by animal vectors, e.g. mosquitoes. The skin and the hair in the nose are mechanical barriers to entry of pathogens that marks the first line of defense. Mucus in the airways and acids in the stomach mark the first line of defense, as well as the chemical barriers. Phagocytes are white blood cells that engulf pathogens and digest them. That is second line of defense, non-specific. Lymphocytes make antibodies that attack pathogens that enter the body. That is specific, non-specific, specific, specific, specific defense. So that is specific defense. And that I have some questions here which you should listen to. You can write them later. But what's a pathogen? We say the pathogen is a disease causing organism. List the three ways transmissible diseases are transmitted: contact, air, and the rest. Give two examples of A, mechanical barriers in the body, B, chemical barriers in the body, and then what are the uses of phagocytes and lymphocytes during infections? What do vaccinations do to white blood cells in the body? So that comes our answers. We have pathogens are disease-causing organisms through air, through all that. So you can pause. If you need to learn more, subscribe to my YouTube channel and get more lessons like this. Thank you for today.